Hey everybody, Jimmy Smith back with a little opinion piece, I guess you want to call it, a little editorial, I guess. This week on SiriusXM, which I work for, I would do MMA Tonight on Thursdays. The hosts on Tuesdays is RJ Clifford, who I work with on Thursday, and Anthony Smith. And Anthony Smith said on that show, talking about the controversy about his coaching, Mark Montoya, James Krause in this case, that he has an agreement with his coaches, or has demanded of his coaches, that they not stop fights that he's in. If they stop the fight, in his words, they walk back to the locker room by themselves. He will have nothing else to do with them. And this is an agreement worked out before the fights. They know this going in. When I first heard this, a lot of things went through my mind that I felt the need to talk about. But the first thing that popped right in was, what reputable coach would agree to that? Really, that's what got me. And I hosted MMA Tonight yesterday. It was just Thursday night. And our producer asked, what guests do you want if we can get them? And I said, Mark Montoya. I want Mark to be able to answer to this. And Mark Montoya is a great coach. I've known him for a long time. Factory X is doing great things. He's a great MMA mind. He's articulate, and he's a smart guy. And I wanted to ask him, is this true? Did you agree to this? Because I can't fathom that. I can't fathom that. I used to coach guys, had an MMA gym. I would never corner somebody. If they said, oh, you can corner me, but you can't stop the fight. Okay, well, find another corner man, because I'm not doing that. Forget it. Your job as a corner man is A, give fight advice. Remember, you don't do injury maintenance and cut stuff like, in boxing they have a cut man. The UFC has their own cut man. So you're not even doing like any type of, taking care of cuts and bruises and end swells. That's not you at all. Your job is advice and stop the fight if you need to. You have two jobs. To take one of those roles away because you said so is insane. And it puts your corner in an impossible position. Impossible. So when I first broke this fight down in the post-fight, I talked about them not stopping the fight. And a lot of people in the comment section said, it's on them. They must not be good coaches. And my thing was, or that they were being greedy, that they wanted their share of the win bonus and all this stuff. Good coaches can make mistakes. These are two great coaches in James Krause and Mark Montoya. They can make a mistake and have a logic to letting the fight continue that we don't agree with, but they had one, right? Glover's chair is old. We thought he might wear down in round 5. Whatever. There was some tactical thing we saw that we thought maybe he could come back. Who knows? If they didn't stop the fight because they had agreed not to beforehand, that's a choice. That's not a mistake. And that's way different. And I really wanted to talk to Mark Montoya about that this week on SiriusXM. We weren't able to get him. He was training somebody, but he did say, I want to get on the show. Apparently, my producer talked to him. But that's a huge question to me, is who in their right mind would agree to that as a coach? And there's so many analogies for it, but one of them is a co-pilot on an airplane. The pilot says, if this plane is headed toward a mountain, you can't grab the controls. But that's why I'm here, is if there's a problem or an issue, I can help, or I can take over, or I can facilitate. That's what I'm here for. And if you're not going to have that ability, then I'm not going to fly here. That's ridiculous. And the refrain of a lot of fighters is, well, I can look after myself. I can tap if I'm in big trouble. I'm trying, it's up to me, essentially. Couple problems with that. First thing you have to understand, if you've ever worked with fighters or competitive athletes, period. Now, the consequences are higher for fighters, but almost every athlete at the elite level, they're addicts. Winning is the drug. That's almost the mentality you have to have. They'll make irrational, bad, terrible, short-sighted, self-destructive decisions to get there. They're not going to think normally and rationally. They won't. They'll sacrifice everything. It's almost like for heroin, an addict will do anything. It doesn't matter. They're addicted to that, and you can't say, I want heroin, but I'm going to be rational about it. You can't. If you're a heroin addict, you're not going to be rational about it. And elite athletes, Michael Jordan would do anything to win. The difference is Michael Jordan wouldn't get beaten into a coma during a basketball game, right? So in other sports, they have the same drive, but it's, almost, I don't want to say academic, but the risks just aren't as high, okay? If you're a cyclist and you'll do anything to win, okay, you're probably dope, right? But, what's the worst that's going to happen to you, right? Bike off a cliff, I guess. But in fighting, the consequences are much higher. They're much more real. So you can't think, well, I'll be rational. Elite athletes, and fighters especially in my experience, aren't rational. They will chase that high of winning or that goal of winning right off a cliff. So there's that to deal with. Number two, I have seen stoppages of fights by doctors, referees, corners, where I thought the fighter was going to get killed, or at least permanently really seriously injured, and the fighter protested like crazy. Igor Vovchanchin versus Ensign Inoue, if anybody's seen that fight. The doctor stopped the fight, and Ensign is literally like slumped down in his corner, clearly swelling, ice around his head and his neck and everything. And he's he's fighting, and he went straight to the hospital, When they asked him about him later, he's like, dude, it was like getting hit by a car. A concussed fighter or a fighter that has taken a beating or even a couple bad punches is not in their right mind. They're not. They're not in their right mind. You can't say, I'll make a good, rational decision as a fighter. You can't, because even if the winning part doesn't drive you to irrationality, getting hit in the head multiple times, you're not with it at all. You are not making proper decisions. And so the idea that I'll put the brakes on it, you can't get around that logical loop of, if you could put the brakes on it, you wouldn't be thinking like a fighter. By the time you need to put the brakes on it, you've already taken so much damage that you don't know how to push the brake anymore. That's part of the process, right? It's an insane person diagnosing themselves. If they, it's the catch-22 of catch-22 if you've ever read the book. Catch-22 in the book is, in order to be declared insane, you just have to request. You have to request it and say, I'm insane from combat, so I can't. But the moment you request it, you must not be insane, so they'll deny it. That's literally catch-22 in the book. That's the catch-22, is if you were with it enough to stop the fight, we wouldn't need to stop the fight. But you're not with it enough to stop the fight, so we need to stop the fight, right? So it doesn't make any sense. I've seen fighters say they were fine and end up in the hospital and didn't remember the fight. I'm okay, I can keep going. And then a few minutes later, their memory starts blanking out and they do all kinds of weird stuff. It's terrible. So that goes right out the window. It's like if you're a designated driver, which I don't drink. I've been a designated driver a million times. You got to get the keys before they start drinking. Because once they start drinking, they think they can drive. And they'll fight you and cuss you out and yell and scream that they're okay. And if you let them drive, they're going to get killed. It's a similar kind of thing. You need that power. You need the keys before this thing starts. A concussed fighter will never say that they can't continue. 1 in 10, maybe, right? So there's that. That's the safety catch that Anthony Smith is apparently taking away from his coaches. And I can't believe his coaches would be irresponsible enough to say that's okay. Or if they said that's okay, maybe they would say, like, they're saying they wouldn't stop it, but they really would. But they didn't in a situation where, as divided as MMA fans are about almost everything, I've read very few defenses of keeping that fight going. I've read some rationalizations where they're like, well, maybe their coach was thinking this or that, but no defenses. No like, oh, you guys are stupid. You guys are a bunch of snowflake pussies. That fight shouldn't have been stopped. I haven't seen that. Almost everybody says that fight should have been stopped. It's just, people have pointed out maybe the rationale of not stopping it. I get that, but there's almost no one I've spoken to or seen even online that was in favor of keeping that fight going. So even the idea that, yeah, we said we would, but we really didn't. Well, in that instance, that's as stoppable a fight as I have ever seen. Eddie Bravo, in a similar but different category, was on Joe Rogan's show and talked about him being in the corner of Tony Ferguson. Well, he's not an MMA coach, and he said that. I have a respect for him. He's brutally honest. He goes, look, they threw me in there. The head coach for Tony Ferguson said, okay, Eddie, get in there and talk to him. And Eddie was like, I I'm a jiu-jitsu guy. I have no idea what to tell him. So he went in there and went, "You're doing great." He was lost, completely lost. I appreciate the courage he had on the Joe Rogan Experience to say, like, I was in over my head. I'm not supposed to do that. I didn't think I'd have to corner the guy. I didn't think I'd have to actually talk to him between rounds. I'm there to manage the jiu-jitsu, and there was no jiu-jitsu. So that was a guy kind of being thrown into that position and just going, The key to me as a coach, former coach, is bad coaching sounds like cheerleading, right? If a coach is saying what your mom would say if you threw in that same spot, bad coach, or doing a bad job, not necessarily a bad coach, but being a bad cornerman. If it's, "You can do it, come on, honey, you got this, you're my special guy, everything's going great, who's a winner, you're a winner." I've heard that kind of stuff. It's cheerleading. You can, like, all this, like, pumping them up kind of stuff. No tactical advice, right? No honesty. It was, if you put your mother in there, that's what they'd say. To me, that's bad coaching. And the difference, though, is Eddie Bravo was kind of thrown into that position. He didn't expect to be the coach. And he was honest about it afterward. It was like, I was in over my head. I didn't know what to say to the guy. But with Anthony Smith, it's a totally different ball of wax. Completely different. And Mark Breland, who was the corner for Deontay Wilder and Tyson Fury fight, apparently had a similar agreement or had a similar rule imposed on him by Deontay Wilder. Do not stop the fight. If you do, we're done. And he stopped the fight. That's love. Or that's at least concern, genuine concern for your fighter. And that wasn't anywhere near as bad a beating, what he took against Tyson Fury, as I saw Anthony Smith taking against Glover Teixeira. I wasn't even close. And he stopped the fight. And from what I understand, Deontay Wilder understood and they're okay. But that's like, yeah, I know I agreed not to do this, but I'm worried about you. That, Rocky IV moment. You're not standing there watching a guy get hurt while you're holding the towel. He threw it in, fight's over, and I think both guys stand taller for it. And Michael Bisping said MMA needs to catch up to boxing in terms of the willingness of corner stop a fight and the social acceptance with MMA fans of stopping a fight. And I completely agree. Some of the greatest fights of all time have ended in corner stoppages with great names. Big names, the biggest of all time, right? Angelo Dundee stopped Muhammad Ali versus Larry Holmes. Eddie Futch stopped the Thrill in Manila. Greatest heavyweight fight of all time. And Eddie Futch was like, "You can't see, it's over." Both I couldn't see the punches coming. Stopped the fight. So I do think MMA needs to get there. And I think there needs to be not just an acceptance in the eyes of the corners, but also the fans of, like, this isn't the first UFC where, guys were getting beaten to death and that was considered kind of the honor of the sport. Like, I don't agree with that at all. We're in an era where that needs to be vocalized. And I would really like to hear from Mark Montoya and James Krause about if that agreement happened or what it meant to them. Because you've only heard one side of the story, and that's important. All right, those are just my thoughts. Really appreciate you. Subscribe and like if you enjoyed it. Talk to you soon.